anytime I hear an exclamatory headline about how the earth is going to be underwater in 12 years, how the entire vegetation is going to be killed off due to human activity, I am always very incredulous. If you look back at some of these doomsday predictions, they come from the same sources that we are supposedly supposed to trust as authority figures pertaining to the environment. The issue is when they make these predictions, they're always years out. And considering the attention span and the memory of the average citizen, they are not held accountable for their wrong predictions. I'm always very scrupulous when I read anything that comes from a climate scientist. I was very interested in seeing the past predictions about how the world was going to end, about the vegetation being wiped out, famine, food rationing, and so on and so forth. I think it is very mercurial that they do this, very mendacious, that they choose to cause the public massive fear, to galvanize them into action. It seems to be very pervasive, though. When the environmentalist movement began in the 1970s, and I read a book about this, the early environmentalist movement, they were more concerned about an ice age than the planet getting too hot. World Meteorological Organization said that the cooling since 1940 has been large enough and consistent enough that it will not soon be reversed. Scientist Nigel Cadler wrote that, quote, "The threat of a new ice age must now stand alongside nuclear war as a likely source of wholesale death and misery for mankind." What is very interesting about that is a variety of things. Let's contextualize and dissect this. The first is that instead of global warming, it was global cooling. Instead of fear about the ozone layer, it was fear about freezing the entire planet. Speaking of an ice age, if you look at the climate records, 1900 was the Industrial Revolution, when the West primarily started using fossil fuels. Now, the premise of the entire global warming argument is that human activity increases CO2, therefore it is going to raise sea levels and destroy the planet due to human activity. And we must cut down our activity in order to stop it from happening or slow down the process. We are now reaching the culmination of this taking place. But the interesting thing about that is if you look at the climate record, there have been 7 ice ages, according to climate scientists. They unanimously agree, but all 7 of those occurred before 1900. 1900 was when humans started using fossil fuels. The second failed doomsday prediction I came across was that if global warming isn't reversed by 2000, it'll be too late. In 1989, Noel Brown, an environmentalist at the United Nations, said, quote, "Entire nations could be wiped off the face of the earth by rising sea levels if global warming is not reversed by the year 2000. And Brown was the director of the New York office of the United Nations Environmental Program. It is now about to be a new decade. Well, it is a new decade. It's 2020. Depending on how you do the math, 2021 might be the new decade. I don't know, but it's been 20 years past. Entire nations could be wiped off the face of the earth. Think about this. This guy is not held to account. And you always hear people say all the time, the United Nations says that if we do not stop fossil fuels, the planet will be destroyed in 12 years. Well, they also said their director of their New York office environmental program said that by 2000, entire nations could be wiped off the face of the earth, but it hasn't happened. In any other profession, if you build bridges, if you work at a restaurant, if you stock shelves, if you constantly get what you're supposed to do wrong, if you're constantly wrong, you will be fired, reprimanded, punished some way, and held to account for not doing your job. If you work at McDonald's, somebody wants 2 hamburgers, you give them 1 instead of 2. You're going to be reprimanded, either by the customer or by your boss or both. But you will be having to be held accountable for your wrong prediction. If you build a bridge and that bridge collapses, you are going to be held responsible, at least socially, for the structure being not sustainable for what it was supposed to be used for. But these intellectuals, who their end product is ideas instead of physical products, are not held accountable for their wrong predictions. You still hear these dumbass millennials, the stupidest generation there is. Unfortunately, I am part of it. They constantly state, the UN says, climate scientists say. But if we're going to go based upon that logic, how come all these other things that climate scientists have said and the United Nations' own director said have not come to fruition? So I wanted to have some fun. I looked at some articles, some predictions by some newspapers that people still trust today. They use this as data or evidence in order to convince you or convince themselves of what to believe. There was one, the headline was "Dire Famine, So Exclamatory." This was 1967 by the Salt Lake Tribune. It says, everyone will disappear in a cloud of blue steam by 1989. Another one, Ice Age by 2020. The New York Times, August 10th, 1969. America subject to water rationing by 1974 and food rationing by 1980. The Boston Globe in 1970. New Ice Age by 2020. Washington Post, 1971. But it's real news. It's not fake news. We can't call it that. New Ice Age coming fast. This came in a telegram from the Department of Geological Sciences in 1974. Another Ice Age, The Guardian, 1974. NASA data. I went back and looked at this. Their data concluded that we are going to be in a cooling stage, but now it's warming, according to their own data. In 2002, there was an article that said famine in 10 years, and it came from The Independent in the year 2000. It's been past 10 years, and there's still no famine. What galvanized me into making this video is I saw a YouTube video that stated how our entire environment, our oceans, everything was going to be destroyed within 20 years. And I commented, I said, all you sons of bitches always say this throughout history. How the world's going to end. How everything's going to turn into a cloud of dust. But it never happens. But by the time it doesn't happen, everybody's already forgotten about your previous prediction and you move on to predict something new. That's what's going to happen in 20, 30 years when sea levels don't rise, when the ozone layer is not destroyed, when we're still on this planet. They're going to change to something new for their environmentalist scam. But unlike most people, I have a long memory. I'm going to remember their past predictions. I'm going to call their ass out. I'm going to say, when I was 26 years old, in my 20s, I kept hearing how the earth was going to end in 12 years. How the sea levels were going to rise, how the coast was going to suck in, and the vegetation was going to be destroyed. But we're still here. Why should we give you government grants? Why should we get rid of more of our freedom for something that doesn't exist? These motherfuckers need to be held accountable for getting things wrong. I'm not saying threaten them. I'm not saying violence. I'm saying simply question them so they cannot obfuscate the next time. make sure they're clear. I simply say, invite them and ask them simple questions. And simply say this, whatever their name is, be respectful. Yes, Mr. Johnson, you said in 2011 that if humans continue to use fossil fuels, that the earth will be destroyed in 10 years. Well, it's been 20 years. The earth is still here, and more countries are developing. The population is increasing. Therefore, more fossil fuels are being used as more nations are continuing to develop. The planet has not been destroyed. You were wrong about that. Then they'll try to change the subject or try to dance around the topic itself. And you can say, well, wouldn't you say the logistics of this look bad? And then eventually you'll say you made this new prediction in your weekly column. Now, if your previous judgment looked to be wrong, appears to be wrong based upon the evidence we have, why should we believe the new evidence that is presented? I'm going to do this. I'm going to be respectful. I'm going to stick to the topic at hand instead of resorting to ad hominem attacks. But these people need to be held accountable for fear-mongering, for trying to galvanize people into giving up their money and their freedom.